I have a new video for you guys because we need to talk about the 215 Indigenous children from Canada. Recently, the world was shocked to learn about the disturbing treatment of these children. Not only were these kids taken from their families and wiped of their culture, but some of them never made it back home. The Canadian government is trying to fix what they've done, but the magnitude of this situation isn't disappearing anytime soon. So let's get into it. If you guys have not heard about this story, I want to give you a trigger warning before we get into it because we're going to be talking about some really dark stuff, and it's been hitting Canada extremely hard, especially those who are Native or Indigenous, because they and their loved ones have been affected by this situation.
It made me very emotional, and I cried a lot all day yesterday.
The person you just heard in that video clip is the voice of Emma Baker. She is an 84-year-old survivor of the Canadian Indian residential school system, and that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today. This photo is actually of Emma when she went to school there, and you will be hearing clips from her recent interview throughout this video. Before we get into the tragic story, let me inform you about the Canadian Indian residential school system. So pretty much the government created a free network of boarding schools for Indigenous people. And you guys might be thinking, that's awesome. I mean, the government is giving their people free schooling, as they should. But the intentions behind it were never good. So Canada created this toxic system that was around for over 100 years. And they allowed the Catholic Church to run it. They told them the sole purpose of this program is to remove Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and to assimilate them into the Canadian culture. Pretty much kill off any Indian that's left inside the child. So obviously that was not okay. No one should be able to rip someone from their culture and then try to whitewash them because you're removing the Native people from their own land. And this is what has led us to this tragedy today, where there are multiple unmarked graves at these schools where these kids would be sent to and they would never come home and return. You guys may have seen the headlines this past week because on May 28th, there was a horrific discovery. Multiple unmarked graves of Indigenous children were found at one of these former schools. These discoveries were made in a city called Kamloops in British Columbia. And actually, this city is the home of the largest residential school that Canada ever had. And that's where we found all of these unmarked graves. Keep in mind, guys, that these camps weren't fun to go to. They were literally designed to assimilate children away from their home and their family. A lot of these children grew up knowing nothing outside of their schools because they were taken at such a young age.
They locked us away as soon as we were 6 years old, and that's bad.
So like Emma said, some of these children were only 6 years old when they were taken away from their families and put into these programs. And if you guys aren't familiar with cultural assimilation, it is not pretty. Cultural assimilation is pretty much the process of a group's language and or culture coming out to resemble those of another group. So pretty much a man or woman from the West, for example, might wear a head covering in the Middle East to adapt to that culture. But it seems like Canada didn't just want to make these Native people adapt to their Canadian culture, but rather eliminate the Native culture entirely. At one point, there were over 150 schools that were open in Canada. But there are only about 20 of these buildings that are still standing or partially standing. And even though this time period in Canadian history is kind of over, it's really not, because there are so many people who have been affected by this system. Keep in mind, over 150,000 of these children were required to attend these schools, and many never went home. So the Canadian government successfully gathered all these children and threw them into these schools. And it seems like after they did that, they just forgot about them and allowed the Catholic Church to take over. And that's when we start hearing about these missing children. One of these school survivors have been telling horror stories for decades about some of these children who would disappear without a trace. Those children who didn't mysteriously disappear, they had to go through hell being at this school. And actually one of the survivors claims it was like a prison being there.
It was like being in jail.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to go anywhere, and if our family wanted to visit, they could do that once a week.
So not only were you locked up in there and you couldn't do anything and barely see your family, but you were locked with so many other Native people. This article claims the schools were often crowded and unfunded, and staff members were not held accountable for how they treated children. Thousands of students suffered physical and inappropriate behavior from some of the staff. So these children are taken from their home and then they are being physically and mentally harmed by these staff members. And this is actually when we start hearing about rumors of a grave site on the property.
There was rumors of a graveyard, but nobody seemed to know where it was. And we didn't even know if it was true.
So Emma Baker, one of those school survivors, actually heard about the rumors back in the day, and she actually thought that maybe the grave site was at an apple orchard on the property.
And there was a big orchard there, and we used to make up stories about the graveyard being in the orchard.
I can't confirm if these bodies were found at an apple field or at an orchard, but I do know on May 28th, they started discovering something they never knew was possible. Using ground-penetrating technology, researchers were able to locate the remains of 215 children that were buried in marked graves at a former residential school. After they discovered all of those bodies, the world was shook because they had no idea that the government went to this extent to eliminate Native people. And we've seen a ton of protesting all across the country because people aren't being held accountable for what they did. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the news broke his heart. The Minister of the Crown Indigenous Relations of Canada said they are now confronted with the truth. As they should be. No government should be able to take all these people, take their lives, and just get away with it. I mean, I feel like the whole concept of these residential schools, taking children from their family with the intent of removing the culture from them, it's just so wrong, and I truly hope the government tries to make this better, but I don't know how they're going to. Two agencies, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, did claim that they're using about $34 million that was awarded in 2019 to research these unmarked Indigenous graves over the next 3 years. The money will also be used to memorialize and commemorate the children who lost their lives at these schools. So obviously the government kind of saw this coming in 2019 if they awarded $34 million to research the effort. But it is a really difficult task because a lot of these children, they didn't have proper records at these schools, and there's definitely no record of all the children who have passed away. The records they do have identify people with names like Indian Girl, number 237. They would also misspell cultural names or just assign students new names that were in English or French to take away from their Indian culture. The craziest part of this all is that we still don't understand the extent to how bad this is or how many children lost their lives while attending these schools. Currently, there is a group working in Kamloops with a radar specialist to survey the school grounds and to provide a full report in mid-June. I'm assuming that report will tell us how many bodies were found on the school grounds, and I have a feeling it's going to be more than 215. And Canada really isn't taking the news well right now. Like I said earlier, there have been tons of protests, and a lot of the Native people don't want to forgive the government for this. The residential school survivor you guys have heard about throughout this video, Emma Baker, actually said that she doesn't even really want an apology.
Apology doesn't mean anything to me, personally. And what I want the people to know that this went on. It was all hush-hush by the priests and the nuns. And I want the whole world to know what we went through.
So obviously, I don't know how these people are feeling because I'm a white man in America, but I could totally understand that Emma Baker is going through so much pain, along with so many people throughout Canada who have lost their loved ones to the government. There needs to be some accountability, and there needs to be apologies from the government and from the Catholic Church. And that's actually a big problem right here because we want Pope Francis to apologize for running well, he didn't run it, obviously, but for the church running a system in this country that took so many lives of Indigenous people. And Pope Francis actually did speak out about the situation, but it was far from an apology. He acknowledges this is a painful situation, but there is no apology for all of the lives lost. I understand why the Pope should apologize for this, because the Catholic Church was tasked with running this system, and look what they did to it, because they harmed multiple children physically. A lot of them lost their lives. There are horrible records out there. Actually, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission claims that there are only reports of 51 children passing away at the school. So where are the rest of the reports of all of these children who passed away? They just didn't care to keep them. And we don't even know how their lives were taken from them, like these children who were just found. And hopefully the report will show us, because I know some survivors there claim that they weren't really fed at the school. One survivor was quoted saying that all of the children smelt of hunger, and I believe it. So could you imagine if these children just did not have food and just starved away? Like, that is so horrendous, and I cannot believe that Pope Francis isn't apologizing for it. Even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called on the church to apologize for its role in the residential school system. But the main problem is the church knows this is not a good look, and they do not want to be held accountable for it, because as soon as they acknowledge they are at fault for it, then people are going to associate this with the church. And it's honestly so messy that nobody wants to take accountability or be a part of it. It's not like these indigenous people asked for a school from the government, asked to be taken away from their families. They never asked for this, so someone needs to be held accountable, and it's really heartbreaking, because I'm not trying to be like, oh, Canada is so bad, but this is a bad part in Canadian culture. The United States has horrible culture as well. A lot of these countries do, but I wanted to share this story because a lot of you guys messaged it to me. I know there are also other creators out there talking about it, and I think it's important that we all understand the depth of this situation, because we call out these YouTubers for doing things to children. Well, it's time to call out this government for doing a lot of things to children for multiple years, for decades, and taking lives. So I hope you guys learned something from this video. I learned a ton doing research for it. And if you guys have any video ideas for me, here is my email right there. Feel free to reach out to me, but I will be updating you guys on this situation. I'm going to be watching really closely for that report that will come in June, and I feel like it's going to be explosive. So my apologies, and my condolences go out to all of those people in Canada who are struggling right now, and I hope you guys get the justice you deserve. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in a new video soon. Bye guys.